Hello and welcome to the Herdline Podcast, hosted by Trace Johnson and the Herds Headset. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode where the Headset and Trace talk all things Marshall athletics. Be sure to follow us on X and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Now, sit back, relax, and let's talk the herd.
Welcome back to the Herdline Podcast. Trace and the Herds Headset are ready to get into another episode of our Looking Back on Former Marshall Head Coaches series that we're doing. We've already had 3 really good episodes so far. You all have seemed to like them based on all the interactions we've gotten on social media and all that kind of stuff. So that's been exciting. And today we're getting into quite literally the golden era of Marshall football, quite literally the most successful 9-year period in Marshall football history. Under former head coach Bob Pruett. We got a lot to talk about there. I mean, it's going to be really fun to get to dive back into a lot of that nostalgic stuff that Herd fans love to get into with all this. You know, this was the era that put Marshall on the map. So going to be looking forward to talking about that. And we're going to talk a little bit about softball and baseball as well. Got some stuff to keep up with for them as well. But before we start with softball and baseball, how has it been going for you here lately, man?
Been going good. Continuing to keep on keeping on. Had a great time last weekend. Of course, I went down to the softball game there on the Saturday. We're going to talk about it in just a second, but obviously things didn't go as planned or as hoped. And the regular season first place is not something that we got to see. However, they are still in a good position. We'll talk more about that in just a second, but it was a good time, good weekend, and I'm really excited for this episode. Of course, like you said, this is the golden era of Marshall football. Whenever we talk about the good old days, this is the good old days, and so this will be exciting to be able to just take a couple moments and reminisce and look on the greatest span of football that our university has ever seen in its history.
Absolutely. It's going to be really fun to dive back into it. I mean, all of the great players, all of the eye-popping stats and numbers and successes that they had at that time. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling to see how fast that they rose at the FBS ranks when they entered the FBS back in 97. It's crazy to talk about, but we'll get into it. But before we get to that, we got to start with softball because there's a lot going on right there as they are now preparing for the Sun Belt tournament. And they, unfortunately, as you alluded to, missed out on getting the regular season championship because they did not have a good enough performance at home in that final 3 games against James Madison. Unfortunately, it just did not work out for them. They had a 7-3 win in game 1 at home against JMU, but unfortunately lost the next 2, 5-3 and 5-0. Just didn't quite work out for them. They've been a little more up and down here the last month or so, 3 weeks or so. And it kind of reared its head again. I mean, they're still the number 2 seed, so that's nothing to sneeze at. They still have as good a chance as anybody to win the whole thing. They finished 37-16 overall, 17-7 in the Sun Belt. That's nothing to sneeze at. I mean, it just would have been nice to have seen a regular season title on the 1 seed. That would have been nice, but that's a lot of Marshall athletic teams have had that problem here lately, trying to win regular season titles at home. That's not been a great trend here lately, but that notwithstanding, yeah, it's been a phenomenal season overall for them. So you talked about it just before we even started recording. Sydney Barco getting newcomer and player of the year in the Sun Belt. Absolutely awesome, well-deserved. I mean, she was a beast this year. Absolutely just one of the best single seasons we've ever seen for Marshall softball. Just a really good year. And, they have a chance now to go on a run and win the Sun Belt tournament. They will play, they're the 2 seed, as I said. They will play the winner of Georgia Southern and Coastal Carolina this Thursday at 2 p.m. So whoever wins Georgia Southern and Coastal Carolina, I'm not even entirely sure when that game is. I know it's got to be really soon. But whoever wins that game plays the Herd, and then so on and so forth. So they have to win. All in all, Marshall has to win 3 games in 3 days to win the whole thing. And I think that's doable. I mean, I know they're kind of in a little bit of an up and down, inconsistent kind of slump right now. But what better time to break out of it than Sun Belt tournament action? So talk a little bit about the Sun Belt tournament coming up. Talk a little bit about softball team. I know you said you were there at that last game. So go ahead and talk a little bit all about that stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, the softball program right now is what I would consider really with them and women's basketball both kind of competing for the most exciting program in all of the entire school right now.
Yeah.
Both of them are competing on really, really high levels. And so that's awesome. That's great to be able to be a women's sports fan right now at Marshall, because there's just a lot of great things going on. I'm looking up here at these numbers. Of course, Sydney Burko, in addition with being Player of the Year and Newcomer of the Year, she's also made it to the first team All Sun Belt. There was also, let's see, one, two, three, four more players that have been named to either second team or honorable mention. So,
Yeah.
that just kind of goes to show to the depth that the softball team had in general. Looking at the statistics, Sydney Burko obviously was the home run queen, of softball altogether, but there was other ladies really right close by that same number. And so it's definitely just been a great season. It's one to definitely remember, one of the best softball seasons that we've ever seen here at Marshall. I will say that it was again, the last two games of the regular season were tough to watch. And really it was because of one person. James Madison had a pitcher, number 3, Peyton List. I'm telling you, she was just unbelievable. She had the Herds number the entire weekend. She pitched both on Friday night and Saturday afternoon. And you could even tell that she was tired, and she was kind of getting to the point where she didn't even have her best stuff, but still, the Marshall just couldn't get anything going against her. So she was incredibly tough, very, very difficult to go up against, and she just pitched 2 very, very wonderful games against the Herd. It's not ideal to lose your last 2 games of the season and kind of make your way into the Sun Belt tournament kind of limping in. But they are still in a good position, very much to how we had mentioned the men's basketball team, with them being the second place team. The first and second place teams, there really isn't a whole lot of difference there.
Right.
As far as the tournament layout is concerned, you get the same benefits. It's just that you play a slightly better team. So, they're in a great position to be able to win it all. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were able to get that done. Louisiana Monroe's a tough team. They've got a good program. But I think depth-wise, Marshall is more deep. One thing that I am a bit concerned about this team, though, is not a lot of contact hitters. It seems that, we got a team full of ladies that like to swing for the fences. And you can kind of go back and look at the numbers, and you'll see that there's been fantastic numbers as far as home runs and runs scored and different things. But a lot of those times it was one score home runs. It's just that's
Right.
only got one score there. Solo home runs, a lot of solo home runs. So they kind of struggle with getting people on base, and so that's something to be on the lookout for. If they're hitting well and they're able to swing for power, that's great. But getting those little dinks, RBIs, that's a little bit tougher. So it'll be interesting to see what they're able to do. Of course, they begin to play this week. The Sun Belt Conference Tournament begins. We're recording this on Tuesday evening. It begins tomorrow on Wednesday. And so I would assume Marshall plays either Thursday or Friday. So I don't know exactly off the top of my head. But overall, they've got a good team. They got some good pitching, solid starters. And so it should be a fun time. We'll see what happens. And hopefully, no matter what, they're able to get into the NCAA tournament, and that'd be awesome, wouldn't it? That'd be really, really cool. So we say good luck to our ladies. Congratulations to everybody on such a fantastic season, and hats off to Morgan Zirkle. Of course, she's an all-time legend here at Marshall with her play of softball. But, man, she came back, and she's taken this program to new levels. And she truly is a special coach, a special person, really a Marshall legend at this point. So hats off to her. Very thankful that she was able to come back and be our coach, and that she is doing wonders. And I will say this too. It is a fun atmosphere going to one of them softball games. I've not been for a long time, and that was the first time that I've been to one for years on Saturday, and it was overall just a great experience. The crowd was fantastic. I know that, of course, they didn't really have a ton to cheer about, but they were on the edge of their seat the entire time, hoping for that just one breakout moment. And right now, too, with all the rumors that we're hearing, really not even rumors, it's Harrison kind of came out and said it, that they do have plans to expand the softball stadium at this time. And I am anxious to see exactly how that happens and what that looks like. But it's definitely a very fun experience, and I encourage really all Marshall fans to consider trying to go out to one of those games because I mean, these girls have fun. Get there
Yeah.
early. We got there early just because we want to make sure we got a seat and stuff. But there was an entire choreography like dance number right before like the game. They're playing hacky sack and stuff, and it was just a lot of fun. And then whenever the game started, you could kind of tell that there was a switch that was flipped, and they all got serious. And so again, that's another just hats off to Coach Zirkle for being able to, let her ladies have fun, enjoy themselves, but also compete at the highest level. So, overall, great weekend. Excited to see what happens this week with the Sun Belt tournament, and hopefully by the next episode, we'll be talking about plans for the NCAA tournament.
That'd be fantastic, and I think they're very capable of doing so. I mean, I think there is obviously they can beat anybody at any given time in the Sun Belt. They've already proven that. So the program's on the rise for sure. And you got to give Coach Zirkle a whole lot of credit for what the job she's doing and the excitement that she's bringing to that, and to the dot and just everything. It's been great to see how it's been going so far, and I think it's only going to get better from here. So hopefully, like you said, hopefully they can go on a run, win 3 games in 3 days, make it to the big dance. Well, not big dance, NCAA tournament. See, I don't know. I'm so conditioned to talk about big dance, but yeah, that would be amazing. I mean, they deserve it. They've had a great year, great players. So hopefully they can finish the right way. But we'll see what they do. But before we move on to the Pruett section of the episode, we have to talk about baseball because a little more ups and downs from them as well. We got to keep up with what they're doing because the season's winding down. I mean, it's not over by any means, but it's definitely starting to wind down a bit. They have, over the last week since we recorded, they had a 9-6 loss at Morehead State. 2 losses to Morehead State in a week is just disgusting, quite frankly. Then a 5-2 win at Ohio. That was nice to get back off the losing streak there against the Bobcats because they beat us before. So nice to see them get a win there. And then the 3 games at James Madison, more ups and downs there. Had a 4-3 loss in game 1, had a 9-0 win in game 2. Really played well there, but then turned around and lost 5-3 in game 3. So that's at least 3 straight, if not 4 straight conference series that they've lost. I mean, that's just not going to get it done at this point. They currently sit at 21-26 overall and 11-13 in the Sun Belt. That's not going to get it done. I mean, if they're going to try to make that Sun Belt tournament, they got a lot of work to do. And it's not going to get any easier from here because, tonight, at the time of this recording, they played WVU for the 3rd time this season in Charleston. So big game there, non-conference. And then they have a 3-game homestand against Louisiana Monroe, May 8th through 10th. So really, really need to win. Forget 2 out of 3. They need to sweep Louisiana Monroe if they can. Like, you need to sweep that team. You don't have, your margin for error is pretty thin at this point. So talk a little bit about baseball, what they've been doing, and what they got to do moving forward to get something figured out here.
Well, they're just not there, and that's kind of sad to just blatantly say that. But we had big hopes this season. We were really hoping that they were able to turn the corner and make some progress and advance themselves as a program. However, we have obviously regressed from last year. I can't really put my finger on it because, like we've talked about before, the roster is incredibly talented. They've got some great players. It just seems that it's kind of like a teeter-totter because the days where they hit real well, they don't get great pitching. And then when the days they pitch real well, they can't hit the broadside of the barn. So it's really interesting. Right now they're sitting at 11-13 in the conference, like you said, and they're really just going to have to win every single one of these Sun Belt, games, conference games, the rest of the way. If they have any hopes of being able to make the Sun Belt tournament, they could squeak in there. But even at that, the performance in which they have been putting up week in and week out, even if they did make it, does not give me a ton of confidence as far as how far they could move on. So very disappointing. Like we said, we thought this would kind of be that breakout year where they're able to turn the corner and make some great noise and, really advance themselves as a program. But they're just not there yet. And I still believe in Greg Beals. I think that he's still a great coach. I really still believe in a lot of the players that are on the roster. It's just been one of those seasons to where it seems that There's been a lot more negative than there has been positive. And you've mentioned on the podcast before that baseball is just an unfair game.
Yeah.
You can be talented all that you want, but sometimes in baseball you're just lucky, and the luck has not been on the side of Marshall. Of course, they play West Virginia tonight, and it's again where we've dropped the series already, down 0-2. This is the third game in that series with the Mountaineers, and it would take a miracle, and truthfully, to be able to win this one, because West Virginia is a good baseball program, and Marshall is just not there yet. So, hopefully that they can find a way to finish the season strong, get a good position for recruits to be able to come into next year and just kind of see. But truthfully, that I think a lot of fans have kind of turned them off in their minds, just because the performance on the field hasn't been the greatest, and that's a shame. I hate that, but that is the reality of where we're at this moment.
It is. That's the reality, and I like the way you put that, because it seems like, and that's definitely been an issue this year. Certain games where Bryce Blevins might go 8 innings, they lose, or other games, they're hitting the ball out of the park left and right, and you still lose because the pitching tells you. So it's like you can't get one way or the other. Like there's been very, very few instances this year where both hitting and pitching have been in sync with each other in the same, like very, very few times. And I think that, that's a detriment that they've had so far this year. And, with some of the players that they're playing, or not players, but some of the teams they're playing against are very good teams. And you cannot afford to have that. I mean, if you were in a lesser conference, yeah, maybe you could squeak by a little bit more there. But if you're in the Sun Belt, it's a tough league. You got a tough non-conference schedule this year. So, you can't afford to have that happen. So that's probably why we're seeing the sub 500 overall record and the sub 500 conference record. They just can't string it. They cannot get any kind of consistency going whatsoever. And, hopefully they can start getting somewhere there, because, time's running down if they're going to try to make a run at this thing. So we'll see what they do. Hopefully they can turn it around here and go on a run and play well in the Sun Belt tournament, make it there, of course, play well in it. We'll see what they do. But with that being said, it is time to talk about quite literally, quite easily, the most successful football coach in Marshall football history, the most successful period of football in Marshall football history, just simply the era that put Marshall football on the map. I said that earlier. This is it right here. You're talking about head coach Bob Pruett, who had an amazing 9-year run with Marshall that is still being felt to this day, still in the forefront of so many minds to this day. I mean, he just did so much for Marshall that it's just, kind of mind-boggling to talk about, quite frankly, because of at that point, you're going up from 1AA at the time, FCS, to FBS 1A. You don't miss a beat. Matter of fact, you get better. And it's just kind of, the rise that they had was pretty much unprecedented. And all these group of 5 mid-major programs that have had great runs since, the last 30 years, all these programs, you think of guys like Boise State and UCF and Memphis and Houston and different programs like that have had great rises at the group of 5 ranks. Marshall did it first. And that's just a fact. So looking at Bob Pruett, and when he got hired on January 9th, 1996, after Jim Donnan had left to go to be the head coach at Georgia. Jim Donnan had amazing success at Marshall for the 5 or 6 years he was there. From the time that he was there, from 1990 to 1995, he had a 64-21 record with 1 national title and 3 national title appearances. So program was on the rise big time at that point. So they hired Bob Pruett, who had interviewed for the job in 1990, but the job that Jim Donnan got, Pruett interviewed for it. And they said at that point, he just didn't have enough. I believe I've heard him in interviews say that he didn't have enough TV exposure, enough big game exposure as an assistant coach. So he had been all over at that point, and he needed a few more years. And boy, he got a few more years, because he ends up being the defensive coordinator for Steve Spurrier at Florida. And they won a national championship. And by the time Jim Donnan had left, it was obvious Bob Pruett was the right guy for the job. He's a Marshall alum, class of 1965. He's from Beckley, West Virginia, born and bred. That's him. He coached high school football a lot in the state of Virginia before he started making his way into the college assistant ranks. He was an assistant coach under Sonny Randall at Marshall in the late 70s, early 80s. From 1979 to 1981, he was an assistant under Sonny Randall, who is widely credited as being a very, very key factor in Marshall's resurgence, Sonny Randall being, because at that point, Marshall was really, they didn't know who they were. They were still reeling off with the crash and all the fallout from that. And, they didn't have a lot of success with Sonny Randall, but man, he really turned him around and got him on solid footing for the future. So that was where Pruett was. He was also an assistant at Wake Forest, Ole Miss, Tulane, and like I said, at Florida under Steve Spurrier. So he had been all over at that point, and he was waiting. He was chomping at the bit to become a head coach, and man, he made it work. So we're gonna talk about, before we get into these year by years, just talk a little bit about. Obviously, we weren't even old enough or alive to know about it, but talk a little bit about just the early stages of Bob Pruett getting hired. And, what he brought to the table early on, and what, I would imagine a lot of people probably had high expectations. So talk a little bit about that early stages there.
Yeah, like you said, I wasn't alive whenever he was hired, so I can't tell you how everyone is feeling. However, looking at the track record and then just kind of knowing our fan base, I would say that there was a great deal of excitement. Bob Pruett is pretty much the key guy that I think Marshall looks for in a head coach. You're looking for somebody that has some ties to West Virginia. Of course, he didn't grow up here. However, he did coach at Marshall for a number of seasons, and so there's that connection. He understood the history. He understood the overall story of Marshall, which is very, very important. And then on top of that, he's had tremendous success going to Florida and winning a national championship under Steve Spurrier. That's pretty good. I mean, you can't really ask for a whole lot more as you're, one of the main coaches there, defensive coordinator. He wasn't even like a position coach. He was, top tier type coach. And so it really, like you'd mentioned a moment ago, the only reason why he didn't get the Marshall job to begin with was just because he didn't have that recognition. So it wasn't necessarily a talent thing. It wasn't necessarily a coaching thing. It was just, we needed somebody that's a bigger name. And so it's pretty much the exact guy that you're looking for whenever you're trying to find a football coach for Marshall, because, he fits every single bit of criteria that you would ever desire or look for. And those that were making the decision back in the day, they may not have understood exactly what they did in the moment, but man, I sure am thankful that they decided to go with Bob Pruett, because he literally brought the program to new levels that we've not seen since. So that was definitely the right hire, the right move, the right guy for the right time here at Marshall.
No doubt about it. And, he started out still, when he was hired in his first year, they were still a 1AA FCS program. And man, you knew that they were moving up the next year, but to see the way that they went out of the FCS was pretty insane. In his first, you don't have to look any further than one of his, I don't know how many recruits he had at that point signed with him, but one of his first recruits probably that he brought into Marshall is just the greatest receiver of all time. So, you literally bring in Randy Moss immediately, and it was like, okay, this is different. You can, already this is different. And, I still think about it like this. The fact that Randy Moss had to play FCS football, and that's just hilarious to me. Like, you're talking about Division 1AA players having to defend Randy Moss. That is just, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. I could not even have imagined watching that live in person. It would have been literally men amongst boys, like the entire time. But with that being said, since he ended up coaching the Herd for 9 years, it'll be easy to group. I'm going to group these years together by threes. It'll be easy enough to do. So looking at the first 3 years a little bit, 1996, his debut year, can't get any better than he got. Simply put, cannot do any better than he did when you go 15-0 and you win a 1AA FCS national championship. Won every game by at least 14 points. Every single game. And, the closest game was 14 points, and that might have happened like once. So, they just steamrolled everybody. He brings in Eric Kresser at quarterback, who had been at Florida, who had backed up, I believe at the time, Danny Werfel, if I'm thinking correctly. He had backed him up at Florida. And he brings in Eric Kresser, and man, he had a huge year. And this is the year after a true freshman, Chad Pennington, had started in 95 and got him to the 1AA national championship game where they lost a close game to Montana. Pruett redshirts Pennington in 96, which at that point I'm sure was probably shocking, but obviously he knew what he was doing because Eric Kresser comes in and has a big year. And Randy Moss as a freshman, massive numbers, 78 receptions for 1,709 yards and 28 touchdowns. That's just hard to fathom. I mean, 28 touchdowns in 15 games. I mean, that's just hard to fathom. Ended up beating Montana, got revenge on Montana, 49-29 in the 1AA national title game. Montana had crept up past them the year before by like a field goal. They beat them at the Joan. They got revenge that year in a big way, 49-29, and it was 49 to, I think it was like 49-6 in the fourth quarter. So they just took everybody out and played the backups. So can't get any better than he started. So, and then going to 97, their move up to 1A in the MAC. They had been in the MAC back in the day, got kicked out of the MAC actually in the 60s for recruiting violations and things like that. And they go back to the MAC in 97. Big year right out of the gate. Randy Moss comes back. The nation starts really catching on to how good this guy is. The Herd goes 10-3 in his first year in the MAC. And, had some close losses, a couple really close losses. They lost at WVU in week 1. That was the one time that WVU actually agreed to play them. Marshall fell behind 28-3 in that game, came back to have a 31-28 lead in the fourth quarter. But then Pennington, at that point, Chad Pennington's first action in 2 years, he throws a couple interceptions in the fourth quarter. West Virginia turns them into 2 touchdowns. They beat us 42-31. And after that, West Virginia knew that they weren't going to be playing Marshall anymore. They knew that was a one-time thing. They didn't want that smoke at all. But then after that, they go and beat Army, play really well, 5 straight wins after that loss to WVU. But unfortunately, they did get pretty much embarrassed at Miami of Ohio in week 7. They lost 45-21. I'm really not sure what happened in that game. They just did not play well at all. I don't know what the story was there, but that was not Marshall football at all. But then after that, they've got 5 straight more wins to end the season. They win the MAC East. They host Toledo in the MAC championship game, beat them 34-14 in the Snow Bowl game, or snow everywhere, awesome game. And then they get to play Ole Miss in the Motor City Bowl in 1997, the first ever Motor City Bowl. Lose a very close game to Ole Miss, 34-31. I mean, that's an SEC team, really good team. Marshall plays them really well, and at that point, you knew they were for real. Marshall was for real. Randy Moss, 90 receptions, 1,647 yards, and 26 touchdowns. Won the Biletnikoff Award for best receiver in college football. Finished 4th in the Heisman Trophy voting. He was there in New York for the Heisman Trophy vote for the selection and all that. Amazing year for him. And of course, he left after that year. He was going to be a first-round pick. He was going to go on to do big things. And then looking at 98, before we wrap up this 3-year period, 1998, you're talking no Randy Moss at this point. You're talking, you still got Pennington, you still got Doug Chapman, you still got all those players. They were great. 12-1 season, MAC champions. They start 8-0 and had several close wins during that stretch. They had a 24-21 win at South Carolina of the SEC, big non-conference win there. They had a 26-23 win at Eastern Michigan in conference, had a 30-23 win at Ohio in conference. So they had a lot of close games early on that year. Unfortunately, they were 8-0, but they did lose at Bowling Green in week 9, 34-13. We suck playing at Bowling Green. Always have, always will. That's just the way it is there. But then after that, 4 straight wins to end the year. And they did have a very narrow win over Wofford at home that year, 29-27. And Wofford almost beat us if it wasn't for Danny Darricott blocking the field goal or whatever he did. So that was close. And then we get back to the MAC championship at home against Toledo. We beat them 23-17 this year. So another MAC championship, that's 2 straight. And then we get to the Motor City Bowl again to play Louisville. We smoked them 48-29, our first ever bowl win, first of many to come. But great year. I mean, they proved a lot that year without having Moss there. Like I said, Danny Derricott was so clutch that year on the defensive side of the ball. Absolutely just huge year for him. Pennington shines again. No Moss. Doug Chapman came on big, 1,000+ yards. Guys all over the field, running all over the field. It's talent everywhere. So you're talking about the first 3 years, 15-0, 10-3, and 12-1. I mean, it doesn't get a whole lot better than that. So talk about those first 3 years under the Pruett there.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't really know if you get a better start than that. Going first year undefeated, I mean, that's pretty good. National champion, like you said, Randy Moss being just the absolute beast that he was that first year. Of course, it was a very, I'm sure everybody that's listening to this podcast has probably ended up watching the Rand University 30 for 30, and you just know the story of Randy Moss just from living around. Him kind of coming to Marshall, of course, was the last resort and the last opportunity that he would really ever have in college. And truthfully, Bob Pruett had to put a little bit of his own skin there on the line because, everywhere else that Randy had gone to that point, he had not been able to find a way to make it work. And so, obviously looking back, it's a no-brainer. Absolutely, you're taking Randy Moss. But also in the moment, Bob Pruett did take a little bit of a risk. Of course, it wasn't a high risk. If it didn't work out, it didn't work out. But still yet, he chose to do that. And we got to see two of the greatest, seasons really ever from any receiver that's ever played here, or really ever in all of, college history, football history. So, yes, Randy was absolutely a special, special player. National champion going out of the FCS. I think that is, if you're going to leave the FCS, that's the way you got to do it. Basically proving, hey, we have gotten to the point where we have outgrown this league. And like you said, they won every game by 14 points or more. So nobody could even come close to them. No one was able to hang with them even relatively. So that was a fantastic beginning stretch for Coach Pruett. Then, that 1997 season was definitely one to where there was tons of excitement. Of course, football was just different back in those days. Coming to the FBS or, however they called it back in those days, I think it was just 1A or whatever. It was different than what it is now. Realistically, everybody would have had an opportunity to compete for a national championship if it all lined up correctly and you played the right schedule and all that stuff. So, I mean, this was huge. And also not just that, but bowl games were a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was the end all be all. That was, the greatest thing that, your college could do. If you can't go to national championship, you're still playing for a championship. And so, Marshall basically kind of set up shop there in Detroit for a number of years as they repeatedly went back there year after year after year. The first Motor City Bowl game, just a fun fact of the headset, I was born that day. I was literally born. And the first shirt that I ever received as a human being was a Go Herd shirt that they gave out at the Cabell County or Cabell Huntington Hospital there. So it kind of was just destined to be a Marshall fan. They unfortunately lost, and that kind of was foreshadowing because I've seen Marshall just blow so many leads before and different things. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Still yet, making it to that game, playing Ole Miss, winning the MAC championship in year one, going 10-3, tough loss against West Virginia, of course. And you mentioned Miami, Ohio, too. Really, that was kind of also a foreshadowing of the rivalry that would take place between Marshall and Miami, Ohio. Whenever you talk about, the Bob Pruett era, Marshall and Miami, Ohio are kind of just always linked together. Fantastic games, like some of the best games that we have ever seen here as Marshall fans. Some have gone our way, others have not necessarily gone our way, but really fun games that we were able to see. And so we kind of saw them getting at us, even though we were the best overall in the MAC. That one little speed bump, that little pebble in your shoe, right? That's just Miami, Ohio to Marshall fans. And so, so that year too definitely was just a great outlook. Marshall fans, I know, were excited about going 10-3 because, when you do move up a level, you have to kind of have realistic expectations. Things will change and things will get a little different. But realistically, whenever they did move up, not a whole lot did change. And so that is exciting. and that was good. I do want to back up bet to the 1996 year just one more second too. You mentioned Eric Kresser. Honestly, one of the most underrated quarterbacks in all of Marshall football history.
Oh yeah.
He's a great player. He really, really was. And of course, he had Randy Moss to throw it to at the FCS level. So I mean, he had stats on stats on stats. But still, yet I don't think he gets the recognition a whole lot as he deserves. Because I mean, you think of it. He was a part of an undefeated team that went 15-0. I mean, that's nothing to slouch at. That is a great accomplishment that he was able to achieve. But I just wanted to give him a little bit of credit there. And then you mentioned 1998. Randy Moss does depart. He goes to the NFL, as he should have. I mean, he had no business playing in a MAC. He just didn't. So he definitely outgrew college football overall. It was time for him to go. But really, that's kind of whenever you saw the team come together in such a way that was even better than it was in 1997. Chad Pennington kind of started – we started to see who he really was without having that lethal weapon of Randy Moss. Man, he didn't really miss a beat. He was still able to make those throws, unbelievable plays. And you mentioned a bunch of other guys' names too. I mean, Doug Chapman he's one of the greatest running backs in all of Marshall football history. Ended up going to win another MAC championship. And like you said, beating Louisville there in the second ever Motor City Bowl that Marshall had been in. First bowl win ever in Marshall University history. Whenever we talk about these 3-year stages, of course, the national championship, that's a big moment. But really, that first bowl win, I would even almost put that on par with the national championship because we have to go back in time and remember that football was different in those days. Like bowl wins mattered so much. And so that was definitely a great way to go out. And definitely, I mean, just something that would be even more foreshadowing for the next year of 1999, one of the most historic seasons ever in all of Marshall history, as we're going to talk about in a moment. But I mean, you can't, like you said, you losing 4 games in 3 years. I'll take that every day. I'll take that every day. Bob Pruett was he got off to a really good start. And I do also want to credit Jim Donnan. Of course, he was the architect of really that 1996 team with, of course, Randy Moss. Bob Pruett was able to bring him in. But the key guys that were really the fundamental guys for that program in 1996 that built in 1997 and even some in 1998, a lot of those guys came in with Coach Donnan. So, Bob Pruett was definitely riding off the success a little bit. He did bring in some things that he implemented and whatnot. I'll give him that credit. But he also was able to go into a fantastic situation, one of the best in the entire country. So, I give credit to Coach Donnan a little bit, but I also have to give credit to Coach Pruett for just simply being able to maintain that level of success and even elevate it, as we're going to talk about in just a moment.
No doubt about it. And, you're also, you got to remember that he's going from playing – the Citadel and Wofford and East Tennessee State to playing, Division 1A teams. I mean, granted, the MAC was not outstanding at that point in time, but there was still a lot higher competition level that they were going up against and compared to 1AA. So it was a big difference. And I liked your point earlier about the bowl game in 98 being a huge deal because you got to think in those days, the MAC had one bowl bid. So unless you won the MAC, your butt wasn't going bowling. So, Marshall could have been a 12-11 win team, but if they didn't win the MAC championship, they weren't going to a bowl game. I mean, it was that big of a difference. And, that really was a huge deal back at that time, just seeing a team get to the postseason. And then, because the Motor City Bowl was a pretty big deal at that point because it was the MAC champion against a very highly thought of, other conference team, whoever. It's like, Ole Miss, Louisville. We'll get into some more coming up. But, yeah, I mean, I don't think you could really have gotten much better for a first 3 years than that. But where they couldn't get much better, they're going to get better in 1999 because we're looking at these next 3 years coming up. 1999, quite simply the probably greatest football team in Marshall history. I still think they hold up to this day as that. You look at that team. You go 13-0 at the 1A FBS level, just kind of unprecedented at that point. You start out immediately in week 1. Your first game in Death Valley at Clemson. You go there and you beat them 13-10, and just a huge win. At that point, probably the biggest non-conference win in Marshall history at that point by far. Huge win. Then after that, they were off and running. There weren't any games even close for the next several weeks. I mean, they just kept winning and winning and winning. Matter of fact, in week 6 at home I believe it was like a Thursday night or some type of a weeknight game, they host Toledo, and they have Corso, Herb Street, and all those guys there to call that game. That was big. That was really big at that point. And they beat Toledo 38-13 in that game. Played really well. And at that point, they were a ranked team because they became ranked after they started 3-0. So they cracked the rankings for the first time at the FBS level after they started 3-0 in 1999. Then after that, you keep rolling. You're just rolling. I mean, I think you had maybe one game that was somewhat competitive. Every other game, they weren't competitive. They were not competitive at all. And you go 11-0 in the regular season. You enter the MAC championship game ranked number 11 in the country. And you host Western Michigan, who you had just beaten a couple weeks prior to that at Western Michigan. But this Western Michigan team, this version of it, that was a lot different than the one that they had played before, because Marshall comes out of the gates really poorly in this MAC championship game. Western Michigan's up 20-0 at halftime. They're up 23-0 in the third quarter. But at that point, the Herd rallied. The Herd had a rally. They end up winning in the final seconds, 34-30, with the famous 1-yard touchdown pass from Pennington to Eric Pinkerton's only ever touchdown he ever had at Marshall. But there weren't any bigger than that for sure. That clinched the win. They go 12-0. Then they earn the right to play BYU in the Motor City Bowl. At that point, number 25 BYU beat them 21-3. Knocked about 2 or 3 quarterbacks out of the game. Absolutely dominant performance. Finished number 10 in the AP poll at the end of the season, 13-0. You're a top 10 team at the FBS level. Pennington gets an invite to New York for the Heisman. He finishes 5th. He was at the ceremony like Moss was 2 years prior. Huge, absolutely massive year. Probably the best defense in Marshall history as well. They were dogs, absolute dogs. I mean, just ridiculous. They were ridiculous. So much talent, so many tough guys on that defense. Could not be stopped, quite frankly. I mean, they were pretty insane. And then another kind of factor that not a lot of people probably think about now was Bob Pruett almost left Marshall at that point, because he gets a big contract offer from Houston. And if you read his book, Purpose and Passion, if you read his book, he talks about that. And he talks about really battling, like as in he was like on the plane to meet them. And he ends up deciding to not do it. And it was a big deal. I mean, that could have totally changed the entire course of Marshall football history if he had left for Houston at that point. But he stays. He's a Marshall guy. He wanted to stay and see it through. And he did. So you're talking his first 4 years. We're got a couple more years to talk about before we move on to the last 3. His first 4 years, 50-4, with a 1AA national title, 3 MAC titles, 2 bowl wins, a top 10 ranking, and 2 Heisman Trophy candidates. Are you serious? I mean, what would we give for that right now? I mean, I know it's different. It's a different time. Football's different, but holy crap, it does not get any better than that. 50-4 in 4 years, 2 undefeated. No, what? I mean, come on. I would have loved to have been a student at that point. That would have been amazing, but that's neither here nor there. So looking at 2000 now, they lose a ton of starters, ton of talent for that 99 team. I mean, you're talking Pennington's gone, Chapman's gone, all those receivers, most of those receivers gone. Nate Poole came back, but most of those receivers were gone. Most of those defensive players, John Grace, all those guys, gone. They're gone. So it's a somewhat of a rebuilding season. And they started the year with a big win over some 1AA school. They had 2 competitive losses to North Carolina and Michigan State on the road. But then after that, They lose their first home game under Bob Pruett. They were undefeated at home in 4 years he was a head coach. They lose to Western Michigan 30-10 in week 5. And at that point, you knew, okay, this team got some work to do. Then the next week, you think, oh, they're going to turn it around. They did not turn it around. 42-0 loss to Toledo at Toledo. I mean, they're 2-4. You are 2-4, and that was unheard of for Bob Pruett at that point. You know, Byron Leftwich comes in at quarterback. He had been there for a couple years, and he plays pretty well, but the team really had a lot of work to do. And they had to really rally the troops, and they had to really figure themselves out quick. And to their credit, they did, because they go on a streak of 4 straight wins after that, including a very key 51-31 win against Miami of Ohio. They lost in week 11 to Ohio on the road, 38-28. They finished the season 6-5 and 5-3 in the MAC, but there was a 4-way tie for first place in the MAC East at 5-3. Marshall got the tiebreaker over Ohio, Akron, and Miami. They got that tiebreaker. So again, somehow they get back to the MAC championship game. They host Western Michigan, who thumped them in week 5, like I talked about earlier. Western Michigan, I think at that point was a 1. They might have lost 1 or 2 games all year. I think they were like 9-2. Very good team. Marshall wins. Somehow, some way, through thick and thin, Marshall wins another MAC championship, 19-14 over Western Michigan at home. Again, this was an era where the MAC championship always took place at the Joan. That was just its designated location, whether Marshall was in it or not. And they win 19-14. And they get another bid to the Motor City Bowl, beat Cincinnati 25-14. Rick Minter led Cincinnati, who would come into herd play later on. So Marshall finishes 8-5, MAC champions, Motor City Bowl champions, wash, rinse, repeat. Somehow, some way, they pulled it off again. Leftwich comes in as a sophomore, comes on strong. Big year. And then that led to really big things in 2001. There was big hype that year. They started out week 1 losing to Florida, number 1 ranked Florida. They lost 49-14. So not great there, but kind of expected that. But then after that, 10 straight wins to end the regular season. 10 straight wins. And they were originally supposed to have played at TCU that year, but because of 9/11 and all the fallout from 9/11, that game was canceled, like so many other games were. They were ranked number 24 in the country in week 10, and then weeks 11 and 12, they were ranked number 20 in the country. So they win the MAC East, but this time the format of the MAC championship game shifts to 1 year it's the East, 1 year it's the West. So this year it starts out in the West Division. They got to go on the road in the MAC championship for the first time ever. They go on the road at Toledo, and Marshall blows a 23-0 lead at Toledo. Toledo beats us 41-36, our first year not winning the MAC championship. So kind of shocking to see how that played out. But we get to go to the GMAC Bowl because at that point the MAC they got 2 bowl bids that year. So they go to the GMAC Bowl, and that's simply the greatest bowl game, most exciting bowl game any of us have probably ever seen. Legendary game. We go down 38-8 at the half, comes back, wins the game 64-61 in double overtime. One of the most exciting games in program history by far. Leftwich starts gaining Heisman attention. He didn't make it he wasn't in the discussion really that year, but by the end of the year, you knew he was coming next year. So he starts getting Heisman hype. And then also another thing is that year started the scholarship reductions. That is when all that started going down. And they had a lot of guys that were ineligible in that Florida game in week 1. A lot of guys could not play in that game. And then that carried over for the next few years, like we talked about with Mark Snyder. So, I mean, the herd's still rolling by this point. You got 99, 2000, 2001. They're not slowing down. So talk about those 3 years a little bit there.
Yeah, like you said, 1999 was probably the greatest Marshall team that we've ever seen. It's one thing to go undefeated and the FCS level. It's a whole other thing to go undefeated at FBS level. And so to see them be able to do that, that's no small feat. To see Chad Pennington finishing 5th in the Heisman Trophy voting, man, that's no small feat. So, I mean, this is just the most complete team. Of course, you don't have Randy Moss on the team. Sure, he's the greatest player that ever played at Marshall, but complete overall, everybody together. There was no other team that I can put up that was probably better than 1999. And you have the legendary moment that you mentioned and alluded to, that last little bootleg pass that Chad Pennington had against Western Michigan in the MAC championship to win the game. That was a legendary last drive, one that which we'll never forget. I mean, that's going to be talked about forever and ever and ever as just a fantastic moment. So, yes, then continue on. That 2000 season was one of the most strange seasons, I guess you could say, in all of Marshall history because, realistically, it wasn't that awe-inspiring. It wasn't a fantastic year by any means, but they were still able to find ways to be able to get a MAC championship out of it and a Motor City Bowl championship out of it. So, I mean, just very odd, very strange going 8-5. Losing some games to which they should not have lost, and playing a very tough non-conference schedule too didn't help any things as well. But still, that's the breakout season for Byron Leftwich, his first year as the signal caller there for Marshall. And man, he talk about just a special player. He's my favorite player in all of Marshall football history. I know that he may not be the best. He's definitely in the top three, but he is definitely my favorite player, as he was the guy that kind of really brought me into fandom. And that 2001 season again was a special year overall, even in spite of, like you said, losing on the road there in the MAC championship for the first time. Of course, that was very unsettling, very, not ideal. But 11-win season and the GMAC Bowl that they were able to win, man, that was just, it was a magical moment. Yeah. Coming back the way that they did, they were down. How much were they down at halftime? You remember what was it?
30.
Down 30 at halftime to come back. And man, that was the breakout Heisman moment for Byron Leftwich. It's crazy because that, like you alluded to, the next season, everyone was just saying, "Hey, we've got a shot at seeing him in New York. We've got a shot at being able to see him in the top 4 in voting." And finishing the season number 21, that's amazing. I believe that's the third highest ranked at the end of the season that Marshall has ever been in all of program history. So even in spite of there being a little bit of a disappointment there with the loss to Toledo, it's still a great season to remember, and it set up another, what was supposed to be a very, very, very special season. And if health would have been able to be maintained, it might have been. However, we're going to talk about it. 2002 season. That's the year that really kind of solidified my Marshall fandom. Of course, maybe, I know you have this and I want it from you. The 2002 DVD, Running with the Herd.
Oh, yes.
I was little, man. And I'm talking about, I watched that every day. I can quote it to you pretty much. I mean, it was the best thing in the world. And I need that. I need that from you as soon as I possibly can, because I've got 2 copies and they're so scratched they don't work. And so it's the most frustrating thing in the entire world. But anyway, Bob Pruett is continuing to kind of show his success. Like you said, the sanctions began to come down. And kind of talking on that sanctions a little bit, if he were coaching today, and all the sanctions that he had against him would have been completely normal. I mean, But this was also a school-wide thing. It wasn't just football. It also kind of led over into the basketball program as well. So both the basketball and the football programs lost, some scholarships because of that. And we'll probably do basketball renditions of this at some point. As far as the coaching is concerned, you could really tell in basketball. I'll just got to say it that way. I mean, basketball stunk around this time. But still, even in spite of all of those things beginning to take place, we're still finding that Marshall's competing at a very high level, finishing the season ranked and finishing the season with the win with the bowl game. So, it's just been talk about a heater. I mean, Bob Pruett had these guys rolling. He had these guys locked in, and the good times were still going there at Marshall. But in the next 3 years, we're going to find that, things started to go downhill a little bit. So let's talk about that.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the Running with the Herd DVD because boy, oh boy, that's still probably I got it on VHS because we're talking this is 2002 or 3. So I got it on VHS. Played that thing like nobody's business. I mean, I don't know how many times I've watched that thing in my life, but it is a lot. A lot. I mean, probably one of my favorite Christmas presents I've ever gotten in my life. Still to this day, just amazing. I mean,
and I tell you what, I wish Marshall would do more of that.
absolutely.
Again, we've not seen anything like that. You know how special it would be. I think it'd be really cool to have. They could even stream it somehow or whatever they wanted to do. But having a kind of season recap where you have some interviews and kind of some behind the scenes looks of what's going on in the program, that's just really cool. And Running with the Herd DVD, it didn't show anything crazy. I mean, it just had some video of a walkthrough practice here or there, and then game footage and then some player interviews. So it's not like giving away secrets.
No.
It's just doing what every other team in the country did. But I really wish that they would do that again and give us a little bit more insight. Because I mean, again, I was young at the time, and I know kids like to, play the crap out of certain stuff, and that was definitely one of those things that I just played over and over and over and over again. And like I said, that's a huge reason why I'm a big Marshall fan right now is because I just fell in love with all of those guys that we're about to talk about in the 2002 season.
Absolutely, and to talk a little bit more about something that I have been thinking about with these last 3 years, what you just talked about. You're 11-2 in 2001. You got just a stacked team, and then 99 stacked team. But you look at 2000 and what Bob Pruett was able to do with that team at that point. That's probably his best coaching job that he did in 9 years at Marshall, because you have to essentially rebuild the entire team. I mean, you got a new quarterback. You got a lot of freshman guys that end up coming in making big plays. You got Darius Watts coming in as a freshman. You've got Butchie Wallace at running back coming in as a freshman. You've got all these guys, that are coming in as freshmen, sophomores, and that's the bulk of your team. Yeah, you had a few guys, that were upperclassmen, Paul Toviesi and different guys like that, but man, you had a really young team. Nate Poole was a senior too, but overall you had a very young team, and they went through it that year. They had some struggles, but man, they turned it on and managed to get it done. So that's probably, in my opinion, his best coaching performance in 9 years at Marshall, probably. But with that being said, let's look at these last 3 years a little bit, because there's a lot to unpack with all these years. Looking at 2002, you said it. That was the year you got into Marshall. That was the year I got into Marshall. I was in the 3rd grade in that year, and my teacher, her son was on the equipment staff at the time as a senior at Marshall, and that was where my introduction came. And it stuck, and it still sticks to this day. And that was a special year to get in on, because that was legendary stuff that year. So looking at it, they go 11-2 again, another 11-2 season. They're preseason number 19 in the country. This is the first time at the 1A rank that they were a preseason top 25 team. They're number 19. They beat App State in week 1. That was when App State was still a Division I AA, but that was still a really good win there. And then game 2, you go on the road. This is a huge game. You're number 16 in the country. You go on the road at number 11, Virginia Tech. Unfortunately, did not turn out well. Tech beats us 47-21. But that was a big showcase game to see Leftwich. Leftwich had a big game. He had 400-plus yards in that game, so that really got him on the eyes of the nation a lot that year. But then after that, they go on a streak of 5 straight wins, really playing well. They did have a close kind of game there at Central Michigan, where they did not play very well, but they won. So that was just you just got to pull it out. But then the game at Akron is still one of the most legendary games in Marshall history, not because they won, because they lost. And the reason that they lost was because Byron Leftwich goes down with a shin injury in the first quarter. And this is very, very well documented on that DVD we talked about, very well documented. He leaves the game. He literally goes to the hospital and comes back and enters the game. Could you imagine if a player tried to do that in 2026? Like, could you even imagine?
With NFL hopes.
Right. With NFL hopes. As in, he could have been the number 1 overall quarterback or number 1 overall pick, possibly. So he had hopes of that. He had Heisman hopes. That's how much he cared about Marshall and his teammates and where he was playing. That's how much that man cared. And that immediately made him an all-time legend in Marshall history. And it doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter what anybody else does. Nothing's going to change that. That was it right there. Hurd loses that game 34-20. Played horrible. Their mindset at that game, that they're obviously way better than Akron at that point, but they weren't the same team when Leftwich went down, and all the emotions of ups and downs, they just were not mentally ready for that game, seeing him go out like that. So, and then the next week, you're talking about a game where in week 9 on a Tuesday night at home against Miami of Ohio, you got to win this game, because if you don't win this game, you don't win the MAC East. This was must win, because Miami at the same time was in the driver's seat in the East. And if Marshall had lost to them, they're done. They have no chance. So you got no Leftwich in this game. You got Stan Hill making his first career start. He goes out there, balls out. Huge, huge game from Stan Hill. And that was the game where he ran in that touchdown in the last few seconds to win the game 36-34. The coach punching the player on the field, the coach trashing the press box. That was that game. And, one of the most infamous games in Marshall history. And Marshall pulled it out. And they're able to close out the season with 5 straight wins. They host the MAC championship game that year because they had gone from the West to the East that year. They host Toledo, so they get a chance at revenge against Toledo. That was the team they mainly played most of those times for the championship. They host Toledo. Great, great game. Hurd wins 49-45. Really great game. That was Leftwich doing the biceps and all that. Just iconic. Absolutely iconic. And still, I wasn't at that game, but I remember, more than any other game I've probably ever watched in my life, I remember that game more vividly than any of them. That was just a core memory for me watching that game. I can hear my family talking. I can hear it and see it all. It was that vivid in my mind. So great win there. They get to the GMAC Bowl again this year. They play Louisville, really beat Louisville pretty handily, 38-15, really no contest. So again, you're 11-2, you're MAC champions. You got the MAC back. And then you're a bowl champion again. That's 5 consecutive years they won a bowl game. I mean, that was pretty big stuff. And that would end up being their last bowl win in 7 years. That would be their last 10-win season in 11 years. And that will be their last conference title in 12 years. So it was a while before we saw this type of season again. Leftwich ended up finishing 6th in the Heisman Trophy voting. Did not make it to New York. If he wouldn't have got hurt, easily he's there. No question about it. Everybody could not say enough good things about him that year. National media, everybody loved him. So if he doesn't get hurt that year, he's definitely there. They finished number 24 in the final AP poll. So you're ranked, again, at the end of the year, you're ranked in the top 25. That would be the last time for a long time that they were ranked in the top 25 to end the year. So now you move on to 2003. And by 2003, the MAC had kind of started catching up with Marshall a little bit. There would be a dominant team emerge that year, which we'll talk about. So at this point, things are a little bit different. Leftwich is gone. A lot of those seniors from 02 are gone. So you knew it was going to be a little bit different. You still had a lot of good players back. I mean, you still had a really good team back overall, but things were going to be a little bit different. So week 1, they beat Hofstra at home. Okay, that's fine. But then week 2, you're going on the road at Knoxville to play Tennessee. And this was a big one. Big, big game. And we play Tennessee so well for the most of that game. And they can't stop Stan Hill. Stan Hill is smoking Tennessee at that point. He is all over them. But unfortunately, after a big, long touchdown, he tries to do a chest pump or whatever it is. He ends up tearing his knee up. And he's gone the rest of the game. Graham Goetner comes in, who would be a legend for another reason coming up. But Stan Hill's gone at that point. And at that point, that changed the entire course of Marshall football for the next couple years, him getting injured in that game. They end up losing that game 34-24. I mean, very competitive game against an SEC school who was a top 15 team at that time. So good performance. But then at home in week 3, they have to start Graham Goetner. They lose at home to Toledo 24-17. That was my first ever Marshall football game I had ever been to, and they lost. But that's neither here nor there. So Goetner starts, he was so kind of performance, just wasn't enough. And then the next game after that, you're sitting there at 1-2. You got to go on the road at number 6, Kansas State, number 6 ranked team in the country, eventual Big 12 champions. We shock them and win 27-20. Graham Goetner leads the herd to the win. I mean, one of the biggest wins in program history, still to this day, the highest ranked team we've ever beaten. Notre Dame was only number 8 when we beat them. Kansas State was number 6. Huge win. At that point, you think, okay, the herd's back. Well, not quite, because the next week they go on the road and lose to Troy. You lose 33-24 to Troy on the road the next game. So you're sitting there at 2-3. You just can't quite string it together at that point. Then after that, they won 4 straight games. But then, unfortunately, a 45-6 loss at Miami of Ohio, who was ranked number 23 at that point with Ben Roethlisberger and all those guys. That ends Marshall's quest to win the MAC East. That was it. That was going to be the nail in the coffin there. They won 2 games to end the year. They go 8-4. Do not get a bowl bid, because at that point the MAC only had, I think, 2 bowl bids, and Marshall didn't get one of them. And there was other teams that year that were good in the MAC that did not get a bowl bid, and that was and that was also the year that Marshall, they announced that they were going to be moving to Conference USA in 2005. So that was one of the reasons why, is because you go 8-4 and you don't get to a bowl. So that was one of the reasons. So looking at 2004, his last season, Bob Pruett's last season, they go 6-6. So it went down again. Although it was a lot closer than people think to being a great season. It was very close to being a really good season. They start 0-3. You start behind the 8 ball big time. First game of the year at home, you lose to Troy, 17-15. Troy just had our number. I mean, that was with DeMarcus Ware and all those guys. They just had our number. And then the next 2 games after that, heartbreakers, heartbreakers, especially the one against Ohio State, number 9 Ohio State. We played them so well, straight up for 4 quarters, played them so well. But unfortunately, Mike Nugent kills us with a 55-yard game-winning field goal as time expired. They beat us 24-21, so close to having a marquee win there. Then the next game after that, on the road at number 3 Georgia, in the Hedges, we played them well but lose 13-3. We played them very well but lost. So you're 0-3. But then after that, you won 5 straight games, and you're in position to win the MAC East. You're right there. You have it right there in front of you. And then on the road at Akron in week 9, you have a big lead. You're talking a 28-7 lead. If you win that game, you win the MAC East essentially. Well, they blew the lead, and Akron beat us. Charlie Fry. Remember Charlie Fry? He was a beast for Akron. That quarterback of theirs. He was very, very good. And unfortunately, we blow the lead, and we lose. And that pretty much takes us out of the equation for the East. Also lost to Bowling Green the next week, 56-35. Good Bowling Green team. And then won at home in week 11 over Western Michigan to go 6-5 and get a bid into the Fort Worth Bowl. So Marshall the MAC was starting to kind of gradually increase their bowl bids. So because in years past, we would have never made it at 6-5. But we make it at 6-5, but lose 32-14 to Cincinnati. So we go 6-6. And wasn't what we really hoped for, and we were much closer to being a lot better than that. Just didn't quite work out. Stan Hill was not the same quarterback at that point after the injury. He just wasn't. That was his senior year. Ahmad Bradshaw comes on strong as a freshman in 2004. Big year for him as a freshman. We still had good players. Josh Davis was still there. We had a lot of good players, but it just didn't quite click that year all the way. So talk about those last 3 years a little bit, 2002, 2003, and 2004, because there's lots to unpack there.
Sure. 2002 is probably my favorite season in all Marshall history, kind of like with you. It's the year that was kind of cemented my Marshall fandom, and there's lots of great memories. And looking back, just thinking about all the players that was on that team, you mentioned Darius Watts. We had Josh Davis. We had Chris Crocker on defense. Man, he was just so good. One of the most hardest hitting safeties that we've ever seen in all of Marshall history. And Orlando Brown, too. Or Washington, Orlando Washington.
Washington.
That was Washington. But just name after name after name. There's some big time guys that we had. And you mentioned the Akron game there. Of course, that was one of the most disappointing games to which we've ever seen. But And a lot of people have the weird placebo that's not Marshall fans. They think, oh, Byron Leftwich, broke his ankle and came back and ended up winning the game.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it didn't happen.
No.
They ended up losing that game, of course. But it was indeed a legendary performance that is an all-time Marshall moment that we look back fondly on. And then that next game, I'm telling you, that's probably my favorite Marshall football game ever. Was that 2002 Miami, Ohio coming to town. Stan Hill came in and he battled against Roethlisberger. I mean, it was back and forth. And that, like you said, that bootleg run where he jumps up, kind of lands on his head in the end zone and wins the game. The entire team goes crazy. I remember they panned to Byron Leftwich. He's on crutches. He's got his crutches in the air and he's going crazy. Just an awesome moment. Coaches get arrested. I mean, just an amazing scene. Scene. It doesn't get much better than that.
No.
And then, you go on the rest of the year. Byron comes back and he plays literally on that broken leg that he had. Just, again, legendary performances. They end up going and winning yet again another bowl game, another GMAC bowl. So, just a great season, one that which I look back on, and it's just fantastic memories. Then, like you said, there's a little bit of a shift. 2003, one of the biggest what ifs in Marshall football. We talked about some what ifs before with Mark Snyder and whatnot, but this might be one of, if not the biggest, is what if Stan Hill would have been able to stay healthy against Tennessee, because he had shown flashes of excellence. I mean, he looked everything like the next big guy that was able to come in and do some great and some special things. And so to see him go down and to see him not really able to recover from that, of course he did. He was quote unquote healthy, but he just wasn't the same player.
No.
He just didn't look the same. I can't really explain it to anybody other than that. And so, still though, finishing 8-4 in the MAC with a transitional year, kind of like we're going to give him a little bit of grace, kind of like with the Leftwich year, and really the same result, 8 wins, other than just not being able to make it to that MAC championship because Miami, Ohio was so good. Like you mentioned, Ben Roethlisberger was just going crazy. He was basically Byron Leftwich 2.0, just in Miami, Ohio. So, you finished that season, no bowl. And again, that was just an annoyance thing. Now looking back, they should have made a bowl. I mean, that would have been, very easily a no-brainer. But just the way that the MAC was set up, that just didn't work out. And then 2004, it's just a really unique season, I guess, because you play Ohio State down to the wire. I mean, you lose by a field goal. Man, that is such just a heartbreaking loss. You play Troy, the first game of the season. Man, Marshall shouldn't have been losing to Troy. I know they had DeMarcus Ware. They're a good team. But, on paper, especially at that time, Troy wasn't anywhere close to Marshall. I mean,
No.
They just weren't. So to lose to them at home just by 2 points, man, another heartbreaking loss. And then another close loss at number 3, Georgia. I mean, it's just like bam, bam, bam. Really tough way to start the season. And to see the kind of how they bounced back really was impressive. Got revenge at Miami, Ohio, like you said, beat your rival Akron, beat Kent State, who is kind of always abysmal. I'm looking at these games on the Wikipedia. They beat them in front of 9,752 fans. I mean, that's abysmal. Then you beat Buffalo. They were terrible back in these days too. UCF, that's a good win. But I don't know what it was. I guess it was, again, just the rubber in the air. I don't know. But playing at the Rubber Bowl for Marshall was just like, it's almost like playing against the next game on that calendar, Bowling Green.
Right.
Both of those places, it just seems that Marshall just had tough times. And so help me, I hope I never, ever see Bowling Green scheduled ever again on Marshall's calendar. I'm just so sick and tired of them. But correct me if I'm wrong, though. That was a team led by a future Hall of Fame coach, Urban Meyer. Is that correct? That Bowling Green team?
I think that was when Urban was at Utah.
Okay.
He had been at Bowling Green before that, but
right. I gotcha.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact timeline of that, but nevertheless, that still was a good Bowling Green team.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, but you just look at this entire season in total, you definitely could tell that football was catching up to Marshall. You were starting to feel the restrictions with the recruiting that was becoming evident, and realistically, they made the decision a couple years prior. Hey, we're heading to the Conference USA, and really, I think that Bob Pruett had a couple more seasons left in him. I think that that was the plan overall, but I think that Bob kind of looked and saw the writing on the wall. Our team's talent is diminishing. We're about to step up majorly in competition in our conference. And so therefore, and then we also got, the restrictions put on us too by the NCAA. So why would I continue to mess around and even risk having a losing season?
Sure.
And looking back on the way that Bob Pruett landed, again, he soared like an eagle, but the landing, he didn't. Let's be honest, he didn't stick it. Okay,
Right.
He didn't close it out flawlessly, and I think that his decision even went even further because we talked about this our last episode with Mark Snyder. He quit late into the process, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think that he thought long and hard about it. I think that he kind of went back and forth about, what is my legacy really going to be here? And if I leave now, I've had one season where it was kind of not great. Everything else, fantastic. I mean, 2 undefeated seasons, 5 MAC championships, multiple bowl wins, 2 Heisman Trophy candidates, and the list goes on and on. So I think that he kind of got to the point where, we're moving up, we're doing all these things. So therefore, I'm just going to make this decision, even though it's hard, to kind of step away as a winner. And quite frankly, it's a genius move because we saw what came after. I mean, Mark Snyder, he had teams that, they had talent. That wasn't the problem. He had ball players. It's just that I think it was a perfect storm of not having enough of those players because of recruiting restrictions, and then also the talent rising up in that Conference USA with some very, very tough teams. So I think that whenever we look at Bob Pruett, the thing that no one talks about is that last season. We never talk about how he ended and how he was able to land. And I really think that, he just had a difficult time in landing his tenure here. But he did make the smart decision to walk away. And so we never will remember him as a loser. We'll remember him as the greatest coach in all of Marshall history. If he had stayed, I really don't know how it would have gone. Because, right. As Marshall had the leadership that we've talked about this before at the time, they were not incredibly forward thinking. Of course, they were going to the Conference USA, but were they willing to put up the same money that the rest of the Conference USA had? No, they weren't. No. So, it would have been really tough, I think, for Bob Pruett, even as they were elevating up to the Conference USA to compete at a high level. He may have done a little bit better, but, I really don't think that he would have done much better than what we saw with Mark Snyder. So, we can say that it's another, scenario of, well, this could have happened, but it's not what happened. He quit, he finished, and he retired, and he will for all of time be remembered as the greatest head coach in all of Marshall football history until Tony Gibson goes on 5 undefeated seasons back to back to back to back to back. Okay.
Exactly.
So, yeah. But, the tenure of Bob Pruett was a special time. It was a time that we have never seen before, and it's a time that we have never seen since. It was, just looking back, just a magical experience. I really do wish that I would have been old enough to really take in everything because, man, that would have been a really fun stretch of football to watch. I kind of caught that back in with the final season of them having great success. But we will always remember Bob Pruett fondly. I do believe that he deserves more recognition than what he even gets at this time. Of course, the athletic building's named after him, or the weight room or something along those lines. But he needs his name in the stadium somewhere or something along those lines to where he is kind of enshrined, man, and I'd like to see this happen before his life is over. Of course, he's getting older now, and he's got some health problems and different things. I'd really like to see that Marshall give him his flowers that he really deserves, because he ushered in and maintained the greatest stretch of football in all of Marshall football history.
No doubt about it. I mean, nothing has really come close. Nothing, I mean, before or after. I mean, Jim Donnan had a great 6-year run, and got, back way back in the Cam Henderson days when he was coaching. Yeah, he did great things, but that was just a different story. That was just way different than what they had in the late 90s and early 2000s. It was just a lot different. And yeah, I mean, I like your point about the way that he didn't really stick the landing on the way out. We talked about that because he kind of, the way that the program had been trending at that point kind of set up Mark Snyder for some hard times. And, he just, everything was just a whirlwind that just did not end up very well for Snyder. And, just looking at that 04 team a little bit closer, man, I mean, they were, that team could have been, and I remember reading in his book, like Pruett's book that I read, the one I talked about earlier, he really thought that team could have been a 10-win team. He really thought very highly of that team. And he said he thinks, I think I remember reading that he was saying that it might have been a leadership problem, like people not taking accountability, not taking leadership over the team, a lot of issues like that, because that team really should have been in the MAC championship. They should have won that MAC East. They had no business losing that Akron game at all. When you're up 3 touchdowns, you have no business losing that game. So even in a year where they wouldn't have been quite as good as they had as they had been before, they still could have been a MAC champion that year. I mean, you could have went out as MAC champions, but unfortunately, it just didn't quite happen. But yeah, there's nothing to do about it now except look at the overall 9 years, because, man, there was a lot to talk about, a lot of big eye-popping things to talk about for those 9 years. And well, I guess I'll better say real quick that he did retire in March of 2005. We talked about that in the last episode. Very late retirement, unexpected, but that was how it worked out. And then they hired Mark Snyder, and we know what happened. So he retired and left a very indelible mark on Marshall history, no doubt about it. Overall, 94-23 record. I mean, that's 80+%, whatever it is. 2 undefeated seasons. 54-10 record in regular season MAC play. 54-10, not including championship games. 6 MAC East titles, 5 MAC titles. They were 5-1 in MAC title games. 5 bowl wins from 98 to 2002 consecutively each year. 2 times ranked in the final AP poll, number 10 in 1999 and number 24 in 2002. They were ranked several other times before that, but they did not end those actual years ranked. But regardless, 3 top 6 Heisman finishers, 2 of which were in New York, Moss and Pennington. 13 players drafted in the NFL. 13, I mean, that kind of was crazy to talk about, and 3 first-round picks. And I even looked up on my phone because I didn't write it down, but these are the players that were drafted under Bob Pruett. So you're talking John Wade, Randy Moss, James Williams, Doug Chapman, Rogers Beckett, Chad Pennington, Paul Toviesi, Chris Massey, Steve Shulo, Chris Crocker, Byron Leftwich, Darius Watts, Jonathan Goddard. I mean, that is a who's who right there of talent. We've never seen that kind of NFL talent that in that short a time. We never have. I mean, that was insane. Absolutely insane to talk about. I mean, it just is. And, you got to look at a few other things as well when you look at the Pruett era. I think one thing that not a lot of people talk about, it was a big deal at that point. The MAC title game was in Huntington every year. Like, for a while, it was in Huntington every year. And that wasn't a Marshall thing. That's just where the MAC picked it. It could have been 2 random teams that had nothing to do with Huntington, West Virginia. They would have been playing at Joan. So I think that was a big thing because, yeah, they would have probably won those titles regardless, but being at home a lot was a big deal because the one time that they weren't at home, they lost. So that's a big deal. And I think that doesn't really get talked about enough. There's no doubt that he inherited a program that was on the rise. I mean, they had they were on such a momentum roll at that point. I mean, you knew that they were going to be good no matter what. Inherited a great program. He took the program to the next level. We both talked about that. It did start to taper off a bit from 03 and 04. I mean, they were so good. They just kind of let Miami was too good in 03, and then 04 they just beat themselves a lot. Marshall did. So the MAC had kind of started catching up with them a little bit. Like I said, they went from winning these games by 3 or 4 touchdowns to winning them by 10 points, 12 points, 7 points. So the games, they started getting closer in scores. The scholarship reductions were in play. His abrupt retirement didn't really help things out. He was very instrumental in the move from the MAC to Conference USA. He really wanted them to get to a better exposure, conference. A lot of dismissals from the team started to rear their ugly head at that point too. Later on in his tenure, a lot of players started getting dismissed. A lot of players started having off-the-field issues. That kind of carried over as well. That kind of didn't help Snyder starting out either. Kind of set up Snyder for some hard times. And a lot of people talk about the MAC being kind of weaker overall at that point. The MAC pretty much was about a 3 or so team conference. You had Marshall, you had Toledo, Western Michigan was good, Miami of Ohio. Those types of teams consistently year in, year out were good. Everybody else, you might pop up and have one good year, but most of the time you weren't very good. So that's one thing that people talk about. I don't think that detracts from anything that they did whatsoever at all. So talk a little bit about just the overall era before we wrap everything up. Just kind of give anything you want to add to what we've already talked about.
Yeah. So like you said, when we talk about Bob Pruett, when we think about his legacy, it is unlike any other coach that we've ever seen. He is going to always be remembered as the greatest. He is the GOAT, so to speak, in all of the coaches that we have seen here. And that's no small feat, because we've had some very good coaches here before. And for a couple seasons, the argument could be made that he got real lucky with like you said, inheriting the good program and whatnot. But you got to remember too, he also sustained it. He also built some of these awesome, legendary moments that we always will remember forever. So it's definitely the best stretch of football that we've ever seen. There has been no other stretch that has ever come close to it, where we have been that consistently good at that particular level. And it's the very thing that we are chasing every single season. Every Marshall fan, every year, whenever, there's no wins on the column yet, we always look back and we say, maybe this is the year that we get back to what it used to be. Maybe this is going to be the year that we see Marshall football back at the fullest of extent. And, we've come close a couple of times. We've seen, flashes of it, but it's not nearly as consistent as it was under his tenure. Football has changed. NCAA has changed. And realistically, the market that we live in has created the biggest issue. A lot of people that, used to go to Marshall and live around Huntington in that time period where we saw, 30,000 plus fans a couple times every year, they've moved. They've gone to places where there's other jobs. So, economically, that did not help Marshall whatsoever. Being a small school overall with not very many people enrolled, I think that we really are towards the bottom as far as total enrollment in all of the country, as far as the power programs and the FBS level. That does not help, because the less people that you have graduating means the less alumni, and the less alumni means the less money that your program is going to receive back every single year. So, Marshall definitely has got a lot of different challenges moving forward. But with that being said, too, the fact that they have been able to show a level of consistent winning really just shows just how strong of a foundation that Pruett set. The fact that we are always in bowl contention, the fact that we're always finishing, either first, second, or third, usually in your conference, that shows just how strong of a program, strong of a culture that Coach Pruett set for, the coming eras of Doc Holliday and Charles Huff, now Tony Gibson as well. It all really was established by him. Jen Donnan was the one that brought it all to fruition and whatnot, but power football is what I'm talking about, and that is Coach Pruett. So, Yeah, he set a level of success to where it's almost created toxic fans. I'm just being honest. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
sometimes Marshall fans can be a little bit too judgmental because, well, Pruitt would never have these guys like this. Well, yeah, maybe, but also Pruitt didn't coach in this time period where there's a lot more disadvantages than advantages. Uh, but I think that the reason the overall what he did set up a total amount of success to where Marshall, no matter what, is going to remain successful at some degree because of we are a program that is historically good. We are a blue blood of the group of six now conferences because historically that's just what we do.
Yeah.
And so you got to give Pruitt a lot of credit because without him and without those years of success, who knows really where Marshall would be. Yeah, I doubt that we would be even close to what we are at this present moment.
No, I agree. I mean, he put the program on the map. He put the university on the map. He that's the guy that did it. I mean, as great as Jim Donnan was, and as great as he did for Marshall, it did great stuff for us. Bob Pruitt is the one that took it to the next level. There's no denying that. There's no denying he's the best coach in Marshall history. Yeah, not all perfect, not all sunshine and rainbows, not the greatest exit. All that stuff's true, but he's the best coach in Marshall history, bar none. Nobody, I mean, 94 wins in 9 years is pretty hard to beat. I mean, it's going to take a whole lot for anybody to even come close to that. And not only that, I didn't even mention this because I didn't write it down. I just kind of realized it in my head. They had 3 home losses in 9 years. 3 home losses in 9 years. I mean, that is something. How many years have we been watching them where they had 3 home losses in the same season? Like multiple times they've done that. Now the Jones still great home field. It's always been that, but it's not what it used to be. I can tell you that. They lost to Toledo in 2003 at home. They lost to Troy in 2004 at home, and they lost to Western Michigan in 2000 in the regular season. So other than that, they did not lose a home game under Bob Pruitt. That's just mind-boggling to me. But that just further cements his legacy as the GOAT. I mean, like you said, the GOAT. That's just him. So with that being said, I think we've pretty much touched on it all, unless you got anything else to add. I think that's pretty much it, man.
Well, let's talk about grades real quick. What would you grade his overall performance?
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that. Oh my
Yeah, got
gosh.
to grade him out. Got to grade him out.
I'm
He's the GOAT, but he's still got to have a grade.
I'm slipping. Oh my gosh. I'm totally slipping these days. But yeah, that's a good point. So go ahead and start with your grade because I thought about this earlier today even, and I totally forgot about it. So go ahead and start.
Yeah, it's a little tough because, like I said, he is the GOAT. I mean, he's the best. But his ending, the 6-6 season, the recruiting violations, all that stuff, and kind of setting us up for a very difficult span of football. I'm going to give him, and this may be a little controversial, I'm going to give him an A minus. A minus. I would assume that about anybody else would say A plus or A, but just based on the ending, how everything was finished and completed, 6-6 with the tough transition and setting, really Mark Snyder up with not a whole lot of time, resources, or ability. I say A minus, but that's the only thing that, I could ever say against the man because everything else that he did was above and beyond excellent.
No, for sure. I thought about A minus as well in my head, but I just went with an A overall, like just a regular flat A. Honestly, if it wouldn't have been for those last couple of years, especially that last year and like the exit and the way that Snyder got set up for bad trends and all that, it probably would have been an A plus. I mean, I think I would have went with an A plus. Like if he had ended on like a 11-12 win championship season and set up Mark Snyder with all that kinds of success and players coming back and all that, I would have said A plus for sure. But because it was a 6-6 finish and they lost a lot of games they shouldn't have lost, and they kind of ended on a little bit more of a sour note than they had been used to doing, I just give them a flat A. There's no doubt in my mind that it was an A caliber run, 9 years. I mean, you could easily make the argument that it was an A plus, but That's where my head is, just because the ending was a little bit wishy-washy there. Not the greatest way to go out necessarily, but besides that, it's an A. With that, it's an A. So that's where it was. That's where it is. I mean, no other coach that we've done so far has had an A. I mean, not Bob, but Doc Holliday had a B+ for me. I think he had I don't remember what you gave him, but that was close to that, but it's just different. It was just a different level. I mean, you're talking so many 10, 11, 12 win seasons and all that. I mean, that's just rare stuff to have that many in that small time frame. So, yeah, that's what I'm going to give him as an A. Thank you for the reminder there. But
no problem.
But with that being said, I think we are done. I think we have wrapped it up successfully, and we'll see what coach we get into next week. I know we'll see what we end up doing. It should be another good one as well. We've really enjoyed doing these episodes. I think everybody's enjoyed going back in time, going on a little nostalgia trip. I think the fans have liked it. So excited to see, what other ones they can pull out in the future. But with that being said, you got anything else to add, man? We're done.
I've got one little thing to add here. As we were recording, we have a little bit of breaking news from Marshall. So we've got a former DePaul and St. John basketball player that has now committed to Marshall. Cayman Maker. Yeah. He's 7'1", big man. And he's from South Sudan, and now he'll be making his way to Huntington. So a little bit of breaking news. We got a big man, another guy over 7 feet tall. So that's always fun to watch. And so looks like Corny's getting the team together. Looks like we will indeed have a basketball season next year.
Go off, Corny. Keep bringing them in, man. Gotta love it. I did see that before we started recording. I just didn't think about writing it down. But, yeah, that's exciting. And we'll definitely do an episode coming up at some point where we talk about transfer portal and who we got and who we signed and all that stuff. That'll definitely happen at some point. But with that being said, we hope y'all enjoy the episode, and we look forward to bringing some more quality episodes like these to you in the future, some different coaches and things. So thank you all for listening, and go Herd.
Go Herd.